Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Hi everybody, good to be here again.
Great to have you here, Sharon. Welcome everyone to this podcast. And our podcast is a toolkit of resources and things that you can use for your classroom, and we want to make it as practical as possible. And the one that we've got for you today is called Tantalising Texts, Categories of Books for F-2 Classroom Libraries. And now F-2 is like foundation to year 2, but in South Australia you say reception to year 2, and in America you'd say kindergarten to year 2. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes, but maybe we'll just say F-2 and everyone, you can just go with that. So that's fine. Now, it's been a big week, Sharon.
Yes, especially a big week for you.
Yes,
actually, a big week of worry for me.
It was. I went to hospital and I had a heart operation. My goodness, I just got to say thank you to all those wonderful health professionals at the Ashford Hospital. They were amazing and did such an incredible job. And I'm so lucky to live here in South Australia. We are so lucky to be in South Australia, full stop, because, I mean, that and also the response to COVID here has been amazing. And we feel very safe.
Yes.
Due to all the wonderful people here in the health industry.
Yes.
And I'm feeling a lot better because of the operation, which is good.
Yes, I know.
It seemed to have worked.
It seems to have worked. Seems to have recharged you, in fact.
Yes. Yep.
So, yes, even harder to keep up with you now.
Yes. And the other thing I've been thinking about during the week, besides the health business, is being a professional, and how being a professional as a teacher, you make really good professional choices, just like those doctors did, about what you do in your classroom. And you don't necessarily follow a book or a program, but you choose some of those things out of those books or programs that will really help you as a professional. And that's what we're on about at the Teacher's Toolkit, aren't we, Sharon?
Yes. Yeah. And there's another word I often use too, and that's, really building a repertoire, that we've, as professionals, we really draw on, we keep building, we add to our repertoire of tools and routines and practices that we can nimbly draw on, because we are having to be, aren't we amazing as teachers? Getting it right for every child
every
in
day.
The class, every day.
Yeah. And
so the bigger our repertoire, the more we've got to draw on in each situation. And, and that's what we hope we're helping teachers to build, expand those repertoires.
So the secret is really good professional learning, and we're just part of that picture, but professional learning is the big secret for being a great teacher and for your kids to really go places. Yeah. So I guess we go to key question number 1, because we're doing our 3 questions split up. We're going to do question 1 now, and the other 2 questions at the end of the podcast. So question 1, Sharon.
Yes.
Can you give us a little review of something?
What have I been up to this last week?
Yeah.
I'd love to share that. So it's always a privilege every week. It's such a privilege to be working side by side with schools here in South Australia. One day this week I had the thrill of working with 3 schools. They come together twice a term. So 3 small schools. So collectively, that means that where teachers are in schools, maybe teaching a number of year levels themselves, that means they don't have a colleague in their own site that's teaching the same year level. So those teachers coming together means they've got colleagues at those year levels to talk to. And we had an after-school session. Oh, teachers work such an amazing day, don't they? They're face-to-face with their children all day, and then in they come with, I just think, boundless energy at the end of a day to take on more learning.
Yeah.
And so we had a session that actually explored one of the things we've talked about in podcasts, and that's habits and behaviours of good readers, and the impact of teachers helping students to select texts, to have time with texts, and to also have time to respond to texts. So I won't say any more than that, because actually a lot of today we're going to dip into those things again, because they're actually all part of the timeless teas that we talk about.
Yeah.
So you can see we're never far from talking about these same messages, in all of the work that we're doing. And I have to say the other thing that's been an absolute thrill this week is meeting with schools to plan for their literacy professional learning journeys in 2021.
Yeah, that's a really important piece, isn't it, for and getting their literacy agreements in place and all that sort of thing.
Yes, and their site improvement plans, to really focus in on those things. And whilst we don't set, it's like in a classroom, we have a plan for what we're going to do, most importantly, how we're going to work. And I absolutely love nothing more than working, well, apart from you, Phil, but I love working side by side with teachers and leaders to help them create really engaging, motivating literacy experiences that really help their readers and writers to thrive and teachers to thrive.
Yeah.
So anyway, we could have a whole podcast just on that, which we're not here for. Let's roll on.
The topic today is, a lot of it is focused under that wonderful timeless tea called Tantalising Texts. And we've specifically looking at the categories of books for F to 2 classroom libraries. And we've talked a little bit about classroom libraries in another podcast and how important they are, but we're going to really go into that a bit more today, drill down into it. And starting off with, well, why is this important, Sharon, to have classroom libraries that have some great categories?
Well, first of all, we've really targeted today at F to 2 for good reason, because there are some categories that are really specific to F to 2 that can really propel children into our young readers who are learning, who are just coming into, being emergent or early readers, really coming into that early experience. And if we think about when we're putting together a classroom library, which, might I add, does not have to be all together at the beginning of the year, with every book in it set
you can do it
for the entire year.
You can do it gradually over time.
Even better if we're doing it over time, because then it's in response to the students who we're working with
and what they would like to read, and
what we want to bring to them, because this is the value. Just imagine what we have, the books that we have in a classroom library that we are bringing to our students represents their literary and book experiences for that year. For some children, that is their entire experience with books and literary texts and informational texts.
So they'd have a lot of input as to what's going to come into that library. But the teacher would also have input?
Yeah. Teacher is directing. Teacher is thinking. And that's why we're bringing these categories today, because we can think, okay, classroom libraries, if year 1, year 2 children, right, let me, pull together some books. But we've designed today to think about what are some of the categories of texts that we intentionally can bring to our young, emergent and early readers, and some of them who are really starting to fly with their reading. We want to think about, I'm going to drill down into some of those categories that we might not have thought about before. And so by sorting a classroom collection into some of these categories, we're giving children entry points into finding books and making choices and selection for books. Oh, I love how your eyebrows just went up there then, Phil, as if I said some little piece of gold.
Yeah, well, book selection is a really big piece, isn't it, that we sometimes don't think about enough. I haven't thought about it enough in my teaching years. I think book selection and choosing the books, the children choosing the books is such an important thing, isn't it?
Yes, and Allington and Gabriel talk about, like, every child every day should have the opportunity to choose books that they can work with, that they can read, or because it's been read to them that they've got ways into this book and there's ways to engage with it. But reading, they should have choice. Without a doubt, they should have choice. That's why the classroom library needs to be full of all kinds of rich and engaging and accessible
Yes, and it also
texts.
helps with being a self-directed learner, doesn't it?
Self-directed and self-motivated.
Yes.
So it's very engaging to know that I'm in a room, just by having a classroom library itself, when I walk into that room as a child, what's it saying when I see that this room is full of books that I can access and choose? It's saying a lot about the culture of what happens in this classroom. So why are classroom libraries important? Well, for all of, for those things.
So to entice the children to want the books,
yes,
to be read over and over again, the rich language with rhythm, rhyme and repetition.
Yes.
Are very important.
Yes, that these are books that are worth reading.
Interesting illustrations.
Wonderful and glorious illustrations that draw us in and tell the richness of the story, bring the other whole layer of richness to it.
They are worth reading. I like that one where they're entertaining to read and to listen to.
Yes. That this is why we read.
Yeah.
A classroom library is there also to help us not only to choose to read, but to yearn to read. Yeah. That it's so worth being engaged
and you also,
with these books.
I notice you've got down here introducing children to some of the best children's authors and illustrators from Australia and overseas.
Yes.
What a wonderful, I think I said this in another podcast, what a wonderful collection of books we have out there, just incredible. In 2020, we can go back all those years, decades of amazing books that have been written.
Yes.
And we're talking about F to 2 here, but,
Yes. But from the classics, there's classic stories through, and poetry and songs and rhymes and nursery rhymes, through to stories of other cultures. But actually we're starting to get into the list there now, Phil, and I want to speak specifically to that list in a moment. But another thing about these books in a classroom library is not only are they worth reading, but from these books, just like children being read to at home, and if we're a parent having read to children at home, we want kids to ask for stories again and again and again, because that's our key. We want books to become favourites. We all want to have our favourite stories because they mean something to us. They They're a way for us to engage in an experience or an understanding or a concept or a world that might not be part of our own world, or it might be very much like our world. So
when they engage with them and they almost own those books and they become favourites, it's like those books are opening up the world of literacy to that child who might not be part of a literacy club. They might not have been engaged in books before. So
no.
Is that what you're aiming for?
Yes, yes. And look, every now and then, we as teachers, we might catch ourselves saying something like, "Oh, I've got all these children in my class who, aren't being read to at home, and so they are coming not having, an experience with books." And there's our cue to say, wow, we need to fill their lives with lots of story and lots of reading to them, so that that's exactly what they get. Readers are made because they listen to stories and start to learn rich stories, start to learn how this all works.
And it's their window into other worlds that they just wouldn't have.
Yeah. And their window into how reading works.
Yeah, that's true.
So as a child sitting with a parent and I'm looking at this book over, we're reading it over and over again, that value, that experience and the richness of that experience is exactly what Don Holdaway noticed and captured when he said, how can we recreate that experience for children at school? How can we have children
as a class having the equivalent of sitting on a parent's lap, seeing that book as it's being read, and there was the big book. There was the notion of the big book being made where every child could see the page, could see the text on the page, could see the illustrations, and could join in with the looking and the thinking and the experience of being in that book and seeing what the reader was doing as they're reading. So many good people come from New Zealand, don't you think?
Oh, true. Yeah. It's big shout out to New Zealand.
They are very inventive people and very they've come up with some amazing things.
Yes.
And Don Holdaway was a proud New Zealander. And we loved reading everything he did and
yes.
Looking at all his experiences especially with, I think he worked with Maori children.
Yes.
And trying to engage them. And he did this study that was world-renowned, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
And his book, The Foundations of Literacy, is one I still dip back into.
Yep.
It's
one of those gems.
An absolute gem.
Yep.
Yes.
It may be sitting in a lot of school libraries, so have a look out there and see if you've got that book.
The Foundations of Literacy, Don Holdaway.
Yep.
I do want to just add on to that bit about that seeing that text, and by choice of text that we have, we eventually have children join in with the reading. And once they start joining in, they are beginning their independent reading journey.
And I think that's brilliant. And I think Don Holdaway was also into rhyme, repetition,
yes,
and song.
It's coming.
Sorry. Right. Okay. Are we looking at kinds of materials or not? That bit right there.
Well, let's move into, I think, because I could, ramble on about these things for, or as we often say, the chatty ramble, shambles.
Yep.
What I really want to move into, though, is thinking about, like, what are the most useful books that we can have in a classroom collection?
Okay.
Now, I could talk titles, but I don't want to talk titles because I don't want people to think that there's now I just need those titles. Of course, there are some that are, we would highly recommend, but we also know that our listeners won't just be from Australia.
Yep.
But I think for Australians, it is important for us too to really think about, because a lot of our resources that we can access out there, these kinds of lists aren't always representing Australian books. I'm just saying that up front, that I want to talk categories, and if people would like more information about some possible titles in those categories, if they jump onto the Teachific website, I will have up there some of the categories with, not just some of the categories with some text that fall within those categories that here in Australia teachers will quite likely find in their school libraries.
So that'll give a bit of an idea of how to fill that basket with books that would fit in that category.
Yeah. But more importantly, classroom libraries, for those of you that have got classroom libraries, these categories can help you dip into your classroom library and look for books that fit within these categories, because these are the categories that once we've got children, or if we're working within these categories, children can then be aware of the category and then go, oh, here are more books that are like that, and so therefore I can expect to be able to do this as a reader with those books.
So you're really building up a rich classroom library, which is really well thought out by having these categories, and by being really rich, then the children have got even more powerful selection of really amazing texts in there because of these really well thought out categories.
Yes,
is that what you're saying? Yeah.
And I'm not going to be, this isn't an exclusive list of categories, but I am opening this up for people to think about as potential categories for, and I'll just talk briefly about the power of these categories as we mention them, but I won't go too deeply into them or people will be here until next week.
Yes.
So.
Well, this is very exciting. Let's get on to the categories. We've been talking about them for a long time. Now everyone's just waiting for them. And I don't want them to wait any longer.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, made the point.
All right, so in no particular order. So stories that are repetitive. So stories that have a repeating pattern to them. Give children a way to quickly join in with those stories because they can anticipate the kinds of things that are coming next. So
I was in a dark, dark house and I went into a dark, dark room. That sort of book, that sort of story?
Yeah. So I could have a book like, so some of our rhymes, some of our songs can be repetitive, but say something like I've got in front of me, row, row, row your boat.
Right.
Is a repetitive rhyme. So row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat quietly by the shore. If you see a koala there, don't forget to snore.
And
you can anticipate now what's going to come next. You can start joining in with me. Row, row, row your boat swiftly down the creek. If you see a bandicoot, don't forget to squeak.
And would this be why Don Holdaway found poems and songs so powerful with those Maori children?
Yeah, well, for any child.
Well, any child.
For any child. So repetition lets us start seeing that some texts have pattern.
Yeah.
And I have a way, I've got an entry point then into, I can start predicting what's coming next. That's what our emergent readers are learning to do.
Yep.
That's what so there's repetitive types of stories. There's cumulative stories, stories that build on each other. The one that we would most commonly know would be, this is the house that Jack built. Here is the house. Oh my goodness, I don't even know it off by heart.
All right, we get
Not
the
well
idea
prepared.
though. No, that's fine.
Or the story of Chicken Little, with the sky falling and then so it builds on. We have one thing happening, and then that's repeated again, plus the next event or the next character coming into the story. And so, once again, lots of repetition. It's building on. And so I have, as a young reader, a way to join in. So if this is being read aloud or big text, then I can start joining in with it. This is giving me entry into knowing how this text works.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So then another category would be those things that are familiar culturally. So things like celebrations within a culture, things like birthdays, events that come around every year. So in Australia, maybe things like, Melbourne Cup's probably not a child example, but the things that we have within our culture that are
Christmas.
That are cultural events, as well as multicultural events. The things across cultures that repeat. So, but things like birthdays, they are can be a cultural event. So the things that we've got some idea and something to connect to with that.
Great.
Chronological. So anything like a counting book, an alphabet book, a book that might be about the seasons, the days of the week. So anything that's chronological lets us start anticipating or predicting what's going to come next.
Yeah, because we know the order, don't we?
That's right.
Yeah.
Then there's stories, like those good, just rollicking stories where we don't necessarily have to say, well, it's a problem, a middle and a solution, but where it's just such a great story to read with beautiful and rich language. Sometimes we just want a basket of those great stories, those that we love, and they may have a lot of elements of all the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, right.
So it doesn't mean that a problem-centred story might not be chronological or might not be cumulative or might not be repetitive.
Yep.
But it might not have those things. So it's just a good story, a story of something, but it might not fall into that neat category of it's got a beginning, a middle and an end.
And as you say, we'll have some examples of these books on the Teachific website.
Yes.
In the not too distant future.
Yes.
Now, what do you mean by rhyme, rhythm, scheme? I'm intrigued by that one.
You know what that is.
Well, I've got to play devil's advocate, don't I?
Right, so anything, it might not be a rhyming text, but of course any rhyming text. So there's the case for there's books that include a lot of rhyme. So, the Aaron Blaby books and the Nick Bland books, lots of rhyme and, rhyming verse through those books. And of course, rhyme helps us to predict, lets us anticipate what is to come. So we're really doing the thinking as a reader. This is what all of these categories are helping us do, to think how this text is working and what's coming next. How's the writer doing this? What are they doing? So when we start seeing patterns, when we're problem solvers as readers, we're really engaging actively as readers. So not all books have a rhyme. Some have a beautiful rhythm to them where it's the way it's constructed, the sentence construction will let us have this beautiful rhythm that flows. And that's literary. That's moved from everyday language into a literary type language. And that's what we want from our books. We want the richness and the fullness of language to come through so that students start building their background knowledge about all this richness to language.
Fantastic. Nursery rhymes and songs.
Well, nursery rhymes and songs. can't get enough of those, and, to bring those in. We do notice sometimes working in the younger grades that a lot of children aren't familiar with as many nursery rhymes and songs as old people like I am. So bringing some of those traditional. In Australia, we've actually got a lot of Australian-based nursery rhymes. So good to look those up. In fact, on Teachific, we've got a few of those and poems that...
I was going to say, we have got a lot of poems on Teachific that are just there for people to use. I mean, They're just fantastic.
Yeah. And maybe I'll say this now before I forget about it, but especially nursery rhymes, songs, poems, these are great pieces for us to have as enlarged copies.
Yes.
So to have a big book and to handwrite in or to, print off in really large text, poems and songs, nursery rhymes that we can add into this collection. Great for kids to be in charge of doing a little illustration that goes on the other page. There's an interpretation of their, of this. Yeah, that's a little piece of gold, that one.
That's a great tool.
Yes.
You call it shared text experience when you do something with the whole class with that book, but they could actually...
when they're reading it, but to illustrate it.
Yep.
But for every poem that I would ever give or song, nursery rhyme that I would give them or put into a big book, I would also give children their own copy, a small version copy of that same poem, because now that that's something that's familiar to them because we've been reading it, therefore it's something that if they've got access to it, of course they could access the big book, but having their own copy of it is a wonderful way for them to have ready access to those pieces. And, of course, how do we collect those? Well, they could be as little booklets, or they might be as a sheet stuck into an ongoing scrapbook that becomes their personal collection of those things that can be kept in their reader box. Yep. Or reader bag, something that they can keep engaging with. And we can use those to do lots of word work, lots of, at word and sentence level work. We can do a lot with those texts.
So when they go off with their own small version of it, it's a really important part of the learning process, isn't it, Sharon, where they, in their own time, get to experiment, play, try out that text in their own ways. Yeah. And I think that goes back to Donna Holdaway's work as well. Well,
and Murray Clay, and there's New Zealand again, with that work around familiarity. Yeah. Once we have, and we talk about it, of having entry points in. Once we can do the work, some work of the reader, and we get to do more and more and more work as a reader with text that is familiar to us. So we've got ways into that text. Emergent readers might be doing that by remembering, using memory to recall a lot of those things, but then we start seeing them moving into more early reader actions and behaviours when they realise that, I just missed out a part. That's not what that says. We start seeing them monitor, self-regulate their reading behaviours as they start moving more into that early reader phase then of, being able to recognise, having built a sight vocabulary and having built more knowledge about the text. Now, I am very aware at this point that we've been talking a lot about early and so emergent and early readers, which will be a lot of our foundation, Year 1 students, not so much about our Year 2s.
Yep.
So the next one I do want to talk about is chapter books.
Oh, yes, because that's more of going into the older children.
So there's so many fabulous little series, especially series and standalone early chapter books for those that are going to start moving into that in maybe year 1, year 2. But chapter books, I would want to be very, early on. I want to start reading not only picture books and poems and lots of this. Every child every day should be hearing, adult reading aloud to them at school. Year 1s, year 2s, I'm going to be starting to read chapter books to them as well, so that they can see where this is all going, and they're able to be doing the thinking and the listening, to get into these ongoing and more complex texts. So year 1, 2 teacher, I think I might have even mentioned this previously, is reading to her year 1, 2 class the book The Glim by Emily Rodder. And
that's a book week book, isn't it?
That is a book week from 2020.
Yep.
That's a book that she is reading that as a chapter book. A year 2 teacher I'm working with, The Enchanted Wood, an Enid Blyton, or The Enchanted Woods, I think it is. Enid Blyton book.
Yep.
I think I just repeated that too many times. Sorry, we're just having a little technical issue here.
Just moved your microphone.
Thank you.
All right.
So, go looking for chapter books to bring in. Tashi, that's one we can recommend. There's lots of, and good bookstores can recommend lots of wonderful chapter books. But what Zola did on Wednesday, Melina Marchetta, Australian author, love this little series of 7 stories, one for every day of the week. It's got chapters, it's got illustrations, and it's a little chapter book. It's got, how many chapters? 8 chapters. So large font. So we want to bring those things in for our thriving readers who are ready for that. We want to get them going further into that extended reading as well. So chapter books.
A great category.
Yes. So information books. We can't forget that we want to introduce lots of fiction.
So that's another category.
Also information books as a category. And those categories there may be subcategories to that. So books about animals, books about topics to do with what we're studying in units of inquiry.
Yep.
So it might be about plants, or it might be about families, it might be about games we play, it might be so things that come off the curriculum. We want to fill part of our classroom space with texts that relate to those things, so that children realise that, wow, they can go to those for information at any time.
Plays is one that that's part of what I love.
Talking your language now.
Yeah, I love drama. So
yes,
plays. Yeah,
plays can be a category. So wonderful, and there's a lot of traditional stories and fairy tales that have been written as plays. So they're a wonderful one to bring in. That leads me to another one that I've got mentioned on here. There are a number of picture books that have been written that are really great for what I call, or what we refer to as, books for 2 voices. So to read it on your own, it looks like we could read it on our own, but when 2 are reading it, and we've got 2 characters who are actually at play in this book, having that as a book to read with somebody else, and each of us taking on one of the characters, you won't see it written like a play, but once you start looking through books, you'll find some books that have that. And it's really exciting to find those. And once again, we'll list some of those. It's just to mention every book here now is just adding to.
Yes, but do you know, Sharon, I think we'll find that there'll be teachers out there that are going to write back to us and tell us some of the books
once they've found.
Once that will found, and that will be a resource for all of us that we can.
Wouldn't we love that if we could actually build this resource list
from other teachers?
Yes, yes,
giving us feedback.
Yes, and do you know what? Children will be finding these.
Yeah,
they'll be going, "Oh my goodness, I've just found." So yes, we would love to.
Because we're already loving the responses that we're seeing on the internet from lots of people on Apple Podcasts, and they could also listen on Spotify or Google Podcasts. But some of the responses have been fantastic. Now, moving on to the next category, Sharon?
Yes. Now, children's own publications are a wonderful addition to classroom libraries.
Yep.
So that once children, in fact, a reception, or here in South Australia, a reception teacher, so a foundation teacher, wonderful teacher I work with, she created part of her classroom library was a bookcase that actually had a space for each child to display their books that they'd made. So can you imagine that? Can you imagine what children feel when they see themselves in a classroom library, their books that they've written up there on the shelf available for anybody to have a look at? So there's that wonderful power of reading, linking to the writing, because it doesn't live in isolation of each other.
Very powerful when that happens.
Yeah. Another great category, authors. So having collections by particular authors is a really nice way to think about how writers work. So people like Julia Donaldson or Pamela Allen, Linley Dodd, Mem Fox, Pat Hutchins, Eric Carle, the Feinbergs, with chapter books like Tashi, David Williams, and all of his hilarious stories. But having baskets or having collections of books by authors and categorising them by the author is a great way for kids to start coming to a glorious understanding that there are people that write these books and that they have a style.
Yes, and it's familiar to them. They're in this family of books that are in that same style, and that's really supportive for those children, isn't it?
Yes. So,
and they just like a series of books is important. Reading it by the same author is really fantastic as well.
Yes, yeah. And there's another category, of course, that you've just mentioned is series.
Series, yeah.
So if we've got a series generally they are by an author, but sometimes we do have series that are connected by a particular topic and various authors have contributed to that. But, yes, series, and that's a really important point, Phil. Once again, highlighting why each category brings something to the reader. So when we say, these books are by this author, then we have entry points into books that we haven't seen before going, I think I know how this author works.
Yep.
And so therefore I can start making some predictions and have some expectations. Like if I'm going to pick up a Julia Donaldson book, if I've read The Gruffalo or if I've read The Whale and the Snail, I'm going to know that all her books are written in rhyme.
Yep. It's the fact that the child is developing a relationship with that author. They've got the relationship with their teacher, but it's now with an author who's another teacher in their class, really, isn't it?
Yes. And in fact, by developing a relationship with a text, like texts teach us.
Yeah.
So I just think I could not live without a classroom library, because for every book that's in the classroom library, I have all of these other teachers in the room, because texts teach us what it is that we do as as readers.
So I guess we've wrapped up a lot of those categories. There's more that we could explore, but I think, should we talk about how we maximise the power of the classroom library?
Yes, yeah. Because, and look, I've skirted around the edges of all those things. We've talked a lot about them actually. But if, along with a classroom library, it can't stay, it doesn't work as a static piece.
It's not just a thing in your classroom. It's a living entity, isn't it?
It's living, and it is something we are interacting with every day, most of the day.
Yep.
So if we wanted to talk about maximising the use of that classroom library, so we are really creating conditions that can help readers self-regulate, self-motivate, self-direct through this classroom library if we wrap it around with 6 things. One is every child, every day, and these really form the core and the essence of a F to 2 of a highly effective reading program. I would say these elements. I'm not saying program as in script. I'm saying these elements. So what would be those 6? Listening to stories, so that every day, every child gets to hear stories read aloud. And here is another category, another collection for the class. Those stories read aloud, sometimes it's just so wonderful to either put those books in a basket and say, here's all the books that we've been reading aloud, so children know exactly where to find those books. Here they are. Right here, they might be at the front of the classroom, right in that chair where the teacher's reading. I know that's where I can get them. Or they might form a classroom library display of, here are the books that we've been reading aloud. And
children love to go to those books that have been read aloud, in preference to any other category, I think.
Yes.
First,
because there's familiarity.
Yeah, again.
I've got a friend that I'm able to, go and work with that book. So listening to stories.
Listening to stories is really important.
Now, I would say the most important person to be reading those stories is the classroom teacher.
Yep.
There are other avenues for students to listen to stories, so we can listen to them as an audio. We can listen to them.
Buddy read?
Yes, it may be through buddy reading. There are also some online resources where we can, type in a text and listen to it being read, or might even see it. One thing I want to add to that is there is nothing more powerful than that teacher, that fluent adult, bringing that book alive.
And because they are the relationship with the children is the biggest thing, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. And that what is read aloud isn't always the teacher's choice. It should be, okay, class, what book shall we read today? So that our class gets the opportunity to bring forth the favourites that they want to hear again. We want to get them knowing that they can have these books again and again and again and again, because for every time they're hearing those stories, they are learning more about how that works.
So the teacher is el numero number 1 reader of those books.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry, I always feel like I've got too many things to say here, but there is one other little piece that I wanted to add in there. By having children ask for stories again and again and again, it's also letting them know that it's okay for them to sit with a book again and again and again. Once we start hearing children say, oh, we've had that already, or I've read that book, we're losing some of the power of what it means to reread a book, because with each rereading of a book, we get something new from it. We're bringing something new to it. So a great discussion piece after when we've reread something is, what did we discover today that we never knew before, even though we've read this lots of times? Or what did we learn? Or what could we do this time that we didn't do before? So this is starting to build habits and behaviours of readers.
So is reading a bit like being a musician, where you get a piece of music and you practice and rehearse that piece of music over a number of times, and then each time you play it in different ways and you learn different things about that piece of music, but you become a maestro?
Yeah, no musician gets a piece of music and plays it perfectly once,
and then goes on to
and says, "Oh, I've done that."
Yeah, and then go on to a new piece of music, and then a new one, and then a new one.
Yeah,
you always have a chance to go back to that same music and play it again.
Yes,
play it again, Sam. Okay, what's another one?
All right, so listening to stories, number 1. Number 2, shared book experience.
Right.
So the importance of listening to stories, I'm hearing how the story works. Shared book experience, I've got my eyes on the page along with the teacher, so the teacher can really demonstrate now what their thinking is and what they're doing as a reader.
And all the class are doing it together.
They are doing it together with the teacher. So those of us who, really understand about the gradual release of responsibility,
yep.
We are actually getting to practice with the teacher at this point. Whenever we're joining in, whenever we're looking in, focusing in on, we're getting to do it with somebody. So we're practicing.
Yep.
So shared book experience, that should be an everyday piece.
Yep. That's number 2. Now, number 3.
Now, children dictating their own stories to someone. When children dictate their stories, it means that they can get sometimes quite a complex story written down for them. The power of this is in 2 ways. 1, they get to see that what they say can be anchored in writing. Number 2, there is now a text that is familiar to them, that they've got an entry point into. They've got another that belongs in their book bag. That's part of their reading collection now. That's something that they can get into. Of course, they're the ones that illustrate it, but as soon as they've got something that their text has turned into writing, on the page, their oral is turned into that written form, and they get to read it, then they're really getting empowered with that reading-writing connection.
Fantastic. And the next one, children writing their own stories and making their own books.
Yes. So here people might be thinking, dictating their own stories is, that we should be letting them write for themselves. Both. We want them writing their own stories as well.
Yep.
And what kind of stories? Inspired by the literature.
The read-alouds?
We are by the read-alouds.
Yep.
So when we've read a repetitive book, we might use that pattern, that repetition. We might make a class book together that follows that kind of the pattern of that story that we've read, or we might be ready to do that for ourselves. So, but children writing their own and creating
you mentioned
books.
that before, having a basket of books that the children have written.
Yes,
as part of the classroom library.
Yes, exactly.
All right. And the last one, frequent...
No, 2 more, sorry.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
The next one, every day, this library, we need our children now using that for frequent reading practice.
Okay.
So those books aren't sitting there for every now and then reading. When you finished your work, you can get something from there. These are the books that form the daily independent reading practice.
Because I have been in schools one school I was working in where when classroom libraries were all set up, the children would come in before school started and they would just go to the classroom library and start reading instead of, playing with some toys in the corner of the classroom. It would be a genuinely love getting there to read some of those books.
Yes. And because it's there all the time, it should be something that we can interact with all the time.
Yep.
But we also want it to form, so what else lives in a classroom library? So our collections because people may well be saying, well, what about levelled texts? What's their place in all of this? So classroom libraries are really a big tool to help. We started off by saying this, helping children to select and choose books that are going to take them on their reading journey. So by levelling texts, that's one way of sorting them, but we can open up that levelling system a bit. Why don't we have a few levels in a collection? Because levels were really only intended for teachers, not for students to be choosing books by. Why not get them choosing books from those collections of what topic interests me here? Let me have a look at what kind of text this is. Is this going to be right for me to read for myself? Is this something I'm interested in reading? Is it going to be worth reading? So I still sift through those same kinds of thought processes to get into that. But frequent reading practice, we want every child every day to have time with a collection of books. We want them holding on to a few books at a time, not just saying, oh yeah, I've had that book done, not doing that again. But we also want them to know that within a classroom library, I've got books that I can access frequently and in various ways. I might sit with a buddy to read. I might sit with a partner. I might read with an adult who is, working one-on-one with me. But that reading practice, I need to carve out time to be doing that work of the reader every day with books from that classroom collection. And the last one in our list, or did you want to add something? No,
that's good.
Thank you. Is responding to stories. So the stories that we're reading that are in this classroom library, how do we get to respond to those? By talking about them, by having discussions about them.
Thinkers talking.
Thinkers talking.
One of our
timeless teas.
Timeless teas.
So these books then are not just these static things there. We're engaging with them in ways. Reading is a very social experience. Anyone who's part of a book club knows that to talk about books, that's why we read, and I've found a funny book that I want to share with somebody, or that I can read to somebody, or that I want to tell somebody about. And of course, they're all wonderful recommendations too for others of, oh, look what's in this book. I want to read that one now. So look, we have just skimmed through. But
I like the way we've looked at, wrapping this up, looking at some categories for classroom libraries, which for F-2s, which we can ask teachers to help us with what books would go in some of those categories and what some other categories would be, in fact.
Yes.
But also we've looked at maximising the power of those classroom libraries. It's not just a thing in your classroom. It is a living thing that is totally part of your teaching and totally part of what the children are learning from those classroom libraries at any time of the day.
Yes, yeah.
But also in your as part of your teaching, which is the shared book experience, or the read alouds, or their writing, or their independent reading. It is just an integral part.
Integral. We are, as teachers, we're drawing from this collection every day for our teaching. We don't need to be looking for particular things to, bring to our children to teach particular concepts. Books. We just need a book.
Yep.
We need books. So this classroom library isn't just for our children. This is our teaching tool.
Yes.
This is
and what an
critical,
amazing resource for us. Like, we don't need a program. We've got our classroom library. We've got the curriculum. We know what we've got to teach. We know the kids' needs through our conferring.
Yeah.
This is an amazing resource sitting right there.
Yeah. And not just for our readers, our writers and our word workers as well.
And it can be built up over the year.
Yes.
It doesn't have to all happen from day one.
No.
And better that it does, because then it's tailored to your teaching as well.
Yes. And our school libraries, I want to give big shout out to school libraries. They are a big part of our classroom libraries. Don't need to be just made from books that belong to the classroom. Like, we borrow from the school, bulk borrows from the school library.
In fact, the school library is integral to these classroom libraries. It is a total marriage between all of them working together. It's not just having classroom libraries and then we don't need a school library. It's having all of it.
Yes.
And so powerful.
Yeah. But really powerful when a school says, in our school, every classroom has a class library.
Yeah.
And so when a teacher comes to that school, new teacher coming to work with that school, they know that their classroom is going to be equipped with a classroom library.
But they also know it's part of their teaching. It's not just a library.
No.
Because I think that's an area where we need to grow in a bit.
Yeah.
And so wrapping up today,
my goodness,
We've had a long session today.
I think we've probably, people might be listening in two parts for this one.
So now we go to key question number 2, which is a good tool that we could use, Sharon, especially related to classroom libraries.
Well, I'm going to relate it to classroom libraries so that we don't go off on another tangent here. Yep. But when we sort classroom libraries, putting books in baskets is a really nice way, or tubs, or ways of grouping those books for easy access and that we can move around easily, around the room, putting this basket, we can pull this basket out. But labelling the basket itself is a way to help children know how these books are being sorted and where they can find what they're looking for. So those labels, we can use category names. So if it's an author basket, let's put the author name on that basket.
In big letters?
Well, so however big the basket is.
Yeah, I know. But to see it from a distance, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah. And so some of these categories, one thing we will have up on Teachific for people is some labels of some of these categories that we've been talking about, and blank ones, because you're going to come up with categories of your own. Yep. And we don't want you to feel that those categories stay static.
And the children come up with the categories as well?
And when children come up with categories, so when they say, this is what, some inquiry might have come up in class and kids say, okay, I want to have, actually a Year 2 teacher I was working with, when they started working on fairy tales, they found they had no fairy tales in their classroom collection. Right. So it was a quick gather some fairy tales from the school library, and children brought in books that they would like to share with the class. So they created a classroom library basket label of fairy tales, and they should have ownership in this too. By us providing some labels for baskets is really just like, we know what a big job it is to set things up. So,
and I like the way you talked about every teacher in the school having a classroom library, and then I guess over the years, then the children, then that's part of their culture, that they know they're always going to go into a classroom that's got a classroom library. They know why it's there. The teacher knows it's going to be part of their teaching.
Yes.
And that's, we found that, haven't we, in schools?
Absolutely. And in fact, some of the schools we've been working with, we've now seen children go through school with a classroom library every year of their primary education. So the habits and behaviours they've been able to develop because of that, so they just walk in knowing, okay, this is, and that they can participate in sorting and building that classroom library according to their interests and where, because that's what we've found over time too, is that as children are growing as readers, that once they get into, classrooms down the track, we're changing the kinds of things that we need in classroom libraries.
Yep.
So
great. And key question 3, what's a tantalising text that you've got this week, Sharon?
Oh, yes. The book is called Family by Auntie Faye Muir and Sue Lawson, which is a stories. So it's blurb, a gentle story celebrating the many things that make up family. So I actually want to read a little bit of this. It's a short text, but a really important story of talking about family, heart and home, yarning old people, endless sky, breeze through silky oak. Family, stories and songs, sharing how to care for mob and country, listening to aunties, uncles, elders and ancestors, learning how to be to each other, to country. Family, caring for twisting gum, rushing river, sighing sea. Family, kinship that binds, showing the way, connecting to ancestors, to who we are, to who we will be. Family, heart and home.
Beautiful. And I love the illustrations.
Wonderful illustrations, and an example of, this story started and ended with the exact same words. Family, heart and home. So it ended where it began. So I just love that as there is a story pattern, and how, that entry point into that family. Can't you just see that as a model for writing your own story about what family means to you? Yeah. So receptions 1s, 2s, or foundation 1, 2, beautiful story of what family means to us. So that, for me,
I think that wraps it up for today.
Yes.
And thank you very much for listening today, and we'd love to have your feedback, especially with some categories and some books that might fit into those categories. And we'd love to have your comments in any area, really.
We just love hearing from people.
Yeah. So that wraps it up today. So bye for now, and
have a great week, everyone.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.